A case over 60 years old has finally come to a close.
Justice after almost 62 years.
The following program contains content that some viewers may find disturbing. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. 1964. A 12-year-old girl walked home from her cousin's house and never made it. For 62 years, the man who killed her had no name. But in 2026, a freezer in a small New York police department gave up its secret. This is the case of Mary Theresa Simpson. Welcome to Crimewatch Central USA, where we never stop digging. Every week, real cold cases, real justice. New here? Hit like and subscribe. Let's uncover the truth. Elmira sits in the southern tier of New York State, along the Chemung River. A working-class city of row houses, factories, and tight-knit neighborhoods where everyone seemed to know everyone else. In March of 1964, that sense of familiarity was shattered. A child went missing. 4 days later, she was found. And for the next 62 years, the person responsible walked free, lived a full life, and died without ever being suspected. This is how investigators finally closed one of the oldest cold cases in Elmira Police Department history. Mary Theresa Simpson was born in Elmira around 1951. She was the youngest of four, an older brother, an older sister, and an older half-brother. By early 1964, Mary's home life had already seen upheaval. Her parents, Ellsworth and Rose Simpson, had separated the previous year, and Mary was living with her father. Those who knew her described an ordinary 12-year-old, the kind of kid who visited cousins after school, who knew the streets of her neighborhood well enough to walk them alone without a second thought. On the afternoon of Sunday, March 15, 1964, Mary did exactly that. She spent time visiting relatives on the east side of Elmira. At around 6:30 in the evening, Mary said goodbye to her family and began the walk home. She was last seen near the corner of East Market and Harriet Streets. It was an ordinary Sunday evening. Nothing about it suggested anything was wrong. But Mary never walked through her own front door that night. And what happened in the hours that followed would haunt this city for generations. When Mary didn't come home, her father grew worried. By 10:30 that night, he reported her missing to police. In 1964, a missing child case triggered an immediate search. Officers and volunteers combed the streets, the riverbanks, and the wooded outskirts of the city. For 3 days, there was nothing. No sign of Mary. No witnesses who'd seen anything unusual. The trail was cold before it had even begun. Then, on March 19, 1964, a man hiking with his 2 sons in a wooded section of Southport, near Combs Hill Road, roughly 5 miles from where Mary was last seen, made a discovery that would change everything. Hidden beneath a covering of twigs, branches, leaves, and dirt, weighed down by 4 heavy stones, the largest of them over 100 pounds, was Mary's body. Only a part of her hand and 1 sneaker were visible above the debris. The Chemung County medical examiner determined that Mary had been strangled. There was also evidence that she had been sexually assaulted. Her mouth had been stuffed with dirt and twigs. Whoever did this had taken deliberate steps, not just to kill a child, but to make sure she would never be found. Police now had a body, a cause of death, and a crime scene. What they didn't have, and wouldn't have for 62 years, was a name. The investigation into Mary's death was, by the standards of 1964, extensive. Detectives conducted hundreds of interviews. Neighbors, relatives, classmates, anyone who had been in the area that Sunday evening. Every lead was followed, every name was checked. But forensic science in 1964 was decades away from what it is today. DNA profiling didn't exist. Investigators had no way to extract identifying information from biological evidence, even if they collected it. And yet, in a decision that would prove critical 60 years later, the Elmira Police Department did exactly that. Officers preserved Mary's clothing, including her skirt and underwear, as evidence. That clothing was placed into storage. specifically into a freezer at the Elmira Police Department, where it would remain, untouched and unknowingly preserving critical DNA evidence for nearly 4 decades. Despite the depth of the original investigation, no suspect was ever identified. Weeks turned into months, months turned into years. The case file was eventually closed, not because it was solved, but because every lead had run out. It would take almost 40 years, and a piece of technology that didn't exist in 1964, for that frozen evidence to speak. In 2003, nearly 40 years after Mary's death, the Elmira Police Department submitted the preserved clothing, Mary's skirt and underwear, for forensic testing. Technology had finally caught up. Investigators recovered a male DNA profile from sperm found on the clothing. But a DNA profile is only useful if you have something to compare it to. With no suspect, no name, and no match in any criminal database, the profile became known simply as John Doe. For another 2 decades, that profile sat, a digital fingerprint with no face attached to it. The case found new life through investigative genetic genealogy, a technique that uses DNA to trace family trees and identify unknown individuals, even decades after a crime. Genealogists working with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children began working the John Doe profile, eventually identifying a familial match. The genetic trail pointed toward a man who had died over 20 years earlier, Alfred Raymond Murray Jr., an Elmira resident who passed away in March of 2004, just weeks short of the 40th anniversary of Mary's disappearance. To confirm the match, investigators needed a direct sample. In November of 2025, with assistance from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, Elmira Police and the Chemung County District Attorney's Office took an extraordinary step. They exhumed Murray's grave. A forensic anthropologist from Detroit conducted the analysis. The result was conclusive. The DNA from the exhumed remains matched the John Doe profile from 1964, with odds of roughly 1 in 320 billion that it belonged to anyone else. After 62 years, the John Doe finally had a name, but the man behind that name had lived an entire life, one that gave no hint of what he'd done. On February 10, 2026, the Elmira Police Department, the Chemung County District Attorney's Office, the FBI, and representatives from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children held a joint press conference. Police Chief Kristen Thorne addressed the room. "This is a historic day for the Elmira Police Department," Chief Thorne said. "Justice after almost 62 years." Sergeant William Goodwin explained how the case had finally been resolved. For decades, the individual connected to the forensic evidence was known only as John Doe. Through investigative genetic genealogy, that individual was identified as Alfred Murray Jr. At the time of the murder, Murray was 32 years old. Investigators say he had no known connection to Mary Theresa Simpson or her family. There was nothing linking the two of them. No shared neighborhood, no shared acquaintances that police could identify. He was, in every sense, a stranger. Murray was a U.S. Army veteran who had served during the Korean War. He went on to marry and raise several children, becoming a grandfather before his death in 2004 at the age of 73, almost exactly 40 years after Mary went missing. Police Chief Thorne declined to provide further details about any other offenses connected to Murray, citing legal protections, and did not elaborate further. With the genetic evidence confirmed beyond reasonable scientific doubt, the Elmira Police Department officially closed the case. Mary Theresa Simpson never got the chance to grow up. She never got to finish school, to have a career, a family of her own. For 62 years, her name was tied to an unsolved file, a statistic in a drawer. But Mary was a person, a daughter, a sister, the youngest of 4 children, navigating a family that had just gone through a separation, walking home on an ordinary Sunday evening like she had countless times before. The investigators who worked this case, across 6 decades, never gave up on her. Detectives in 1964 preserved evidence they couldn't yet use. trusting that science would one day catch up. Forensic teams in 2003 extracted a profile from evidence stored for nearly 40 years. Genealogists in 2025 traced a family tree that led to a grave. And in February 2026, Elmira Police Chief Kristen Thorne, Sergeant William Goodwin, the Chemung County District Attorney's Office, the FBI, and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children stood together and gave Mary's family something they had waited 62 years for: an answer. Alfred Murray Jr. lived a full life. He served his country. He raised a family. He died never having to answer for what he did to a 12-year-old girl on a March evening in 1964. But his name is no longer John Doe. And Mary Theresa Simpson is no longer just a case file. She is remembered. If you want more cases like this, cold cases finally cracked by modern forensic science, subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. Next time on Crimewatch Central, a missing persons case that sat unsolved for over a decade until one detective refused to let it go. Thanks for watching, and remember, every victim deserves to be remembered.